Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. Today we're going to run through just a few tips, I guess, based on your energy consumption, particularly for customers that might be facing some hardship at the moment due to COVID, and not just hardship, but just having your operations change around. We'll share a few tips that you could be using for everyone, and then a few of the tools that Flow Power customers have access to that our current customers can use. And if you're looking at your electricity retailing agreement for the 1st of July, you could obviously consider some of the options that we've got available. So just jumping on, I'll quickly whip around for some introductions for everyone that's on the call. So we've got myself, my name's Jacob. I'm the sales manager at Flow Power, looking after Victoria, South Australia and Tassie. Been at Flow Power for a few years now, starting off in account management and now more focused on the sales side of things. I've got a pretty poor fun fact there. The other guys have definitely trumped me. It was my job to get something better for everyone, but I'm afraid I didn't get to it, so sorry about that. Byron, how are you going?
Yeah, very well, Jacob. Thanks for having me on. So I'm the regional manager of New South Wales and Queensland. Haven't been to Queensland for a few weeks now, as you can imagine, but yes. Based in Sydney. I sit as part of the Flow Power's engineering team, new project developments, and kind of client-side engineering and consultancy. My fun fact, this is the funnest thing I can think of, is I own a little red speedboat called Havana Club. I think for anyone who's picturing a shiny top-of-the-line speedboat, you'd be very mistaken. Havana Club is a nod to the fact that it looks like it's something you might find at Cuba, in a Cuban wharf.
Fitting name then. Very good. Well, better than mine. So I think Emmett's trumped us both with a bit of bragging about his food expertise. How are you going, Emmett? Do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, pretty well, Jacob, and thanks, Byron, as well. Yeah, I think my my food fun fact sort of beats yours a little bit, Jacob. I don't think I've cooked it for either of you in the past before, but would be happy to in the future if you like. How's everything going from working from home for you at the moment, guys?
Yeah, look, no complaints from me here in Sydney. Working from home, saving a bit on the commute. It's obviously a bit of a strange adaptation though to normal life. I can see that you two have used the same interior decorator for your homes.
Yeah, that's right.
You've caught us out a little bit there. I didn't want to inflict my home internet pains on the audience today, so I thought I'd pop into the office, and it looks like Jacob's done the same. So good to see you, Jacob.
Yes, good to see you too, Emmett. But just for everyone's knowledge, we are very much socially distanced, pretty much at the opposite ends of the office. But if needs be, I can wave to him from here. All right, so yeah, thanks. So we can probably kick into it then. Okay, so just a little bit about Flow Power itself. So we are an electricity retailer, but we very much got our start as an energy management company. So that's very much the focus of the business. Our goal is to accelerate Australia to a net carbon zero future, and we aim to do that by using our customers themselves. So customers are very focused in things like demand response, signing PPAs with renewable energy projects. We also have a really large engineering team, which, as Byron pointed out, is his focus, that work on-site stuff for customers, some consulting work, and developing renewable projects as well. And that's my elevator pitch. Emmett, does that pretty much tick all the boxes?
Yeah, certainly does. I suppose one thing to add from an account manager's perspective, we really focus here at Flow Power on working with customers to, I guess, empower them to make decisions around their energy, to obviously, save on costs, but also, aim towards moving Australia towards that net zero carbon future, as you alluded to.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. All right, so just quickly to run everyone through what we'll be discussing today. So we are going to do a little bit of an update on the market, we'll touch on how COVID's affected the energy prices, but also a little bit about what was going on before that. We're going to look at some solutions that businesses are using, customers of ours that are using that have been impacted by COVID, and also a few other ideas that we've been bouncing around internally that customers could use to lower their energy costs, particularly if things have changed on site. And then finally, we'll be running through a case study that's just a bit of an example of how customers can use the tools that we've got available and some other stuff that they can do to lower their costs during these hard times. And finally, we'll reserve around 15 minutes for questions. So yeah, the whole thing goes for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions at the end. So starting off with a bit of an update on the market. So prices have fallen quite a lot recently. There have been some impacts from COVID itself, so a lot more people are working from home. Obviously, we've had huge drops in demand. So restaurants are closed, retail shops are closed, lots of commercial offices are closed. So the periods of when demand is peaking throughout the day are changing. And also there's just been this huge drop in demand over the last couple of months.
Yeah, I think it's a really we have had a few interesting months since the start of the year. I guess, we saw that the very start of the year we had bushfires, and there was outages on the network side, which changed prices and caused some kind of peak demand days. And then, but at the same time, with bushfires, we still had a relatively mild summer. So we saw load or demand tapering off even before coronavirus has come along. So there's been quite a bit of industry coverage on this over the last little while, and I think it sounds like saw demand falling at roughly 5% before Corona, and then as Corona has taken its toll, we've seen demands drop another 10% and futures come down, and I think what's been quite interesting is that drop off has been well aligned internationally with what other markets have reported, following that same shape or reaction in power prices and demand as they have during the actual lockdown measures and the curve that everyone's so familiar with.
Yeah, that's right. We've also had things like oil prices dropping significantly, where they've hit negative prices in the US, and that's obviously dampening the gas prices, which contributes a lot to our market as well. So there's been a lot of reasons that the prices are very depressed at the moment. And as you said there, Byron, it's not just COVID. We were entering this period with some of the lowest pricing we'd seen over the last few years. It's been a very tough year, and we had obviously the bushfires earlier in the year, but there wasn't the vol events. So when pricing really shoots up that we've seen in early 2018 and 17, or 19 and 18 rather.
Yeah, I suppose that's a really good point there, Jacob. The events that we saw in 2019 in January and March didn't really occur this summer, and that obviously softer environment really did contribute to the low prices we're seeing, and obviously the opportunities there are for businesses at the moment to contract low energy prices, not only for an immediate term, but also for later years as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, yeah, here we go. So we've got a slide that is showing the historic spot price for the last, what have we got there, a year and a half almost. So there's exactly what we were just discussing. You can see those high price periods in January, February, March in 2019 that weren't quite realised in Q1 this year. We did have a bit of a spike up in January, but compared to that peak for 2019, it's almost nothing. But as you can see, there's been a pretty big trend to the downside. So even in March, we're obviously seeing a lot lower pricing, and I guess the COVID shutdown started affecting us later on in that month. So February and March, both very cheap, and then obviously has been accelerated due to the shutdowns over the last couple of months.
I think there's been that increasing role of renewables and the impact that they're playing in terms of keeping a lid on market prices as well through this event. And I know AEMO released their Q1 quarterly energy dynamics report a few weeks back, and that showed that in terms of NEM emissions and emissions intensity of energy, we're probably unsurprisingly at historically low levels due to the amount of renewables or the percentage of renewables that are operating in the grid at the moment.
Yeah, definitely, and we're definitely seeing that duck curve, as they call it. So solar obviously very plentiful through the day. We're seeing really low prices through the middle of the day due to all that solar in the system. I think we just broke a record or a boundary for wind generation for the most coming out at any point. I think the other day, I'm not sure if either of you know what that number was, but I did read about that, and now I've stupidly forgotten what the number was that we hit.
I did hear about a record being broken in Britain's national grid, and we reported on this actually last week in On the Spot. But they broke its record for over 18 days without reliance on coal generation. So
Wow.
predominantly renewables in Britain's national grid. And the cool thing I think about this record is that you immediately think, oh yeah, it's due to coronavirus. That's why they've got it. If this is a one-off, but
Sure.
the previous record was actually set last year, and it was I think 4 or 6 hours shorter. So 18 days and 2 hours versus 18 days and 6 hours. So it shows that it's not a one-off. It is. It's showing that within Britain's national grid, renewables can play a huge role in meeting the demands of energy.
Yeah, really positive to see we're moving in that right direction. All right, we'll just move on to the next one. So
I suppose what we're looking to cover here is, I guess, options for businesses that are available during this time. We're wanting to cover off 3 different points that we've sort of, I guess, alluded to already in the webinar. One being the ability for businesses to potentially adapt their operations around these low prices that we are seeing in the market at the moment. Obviously, as you mentioned there, Jacob, really soft spot prices during the daytime, where solar and wind is quite prevalent, mean that there is opportunities for businesses who may be potentially reduced output due to COVID-19 to take advantage of those prices. Moving on to that as well, we're looking at sort of outlining how low prices in the market aren't necessarily just immediate. There's also low prices available for later years. So for businesses that may not be coming out of contract at the moment, they may want to look at potentially signing a contract in advance to take advantage of the prices we're seeing. And I guess lastly, we want to sort of look as well that there are different options. So for businesses that don't have much certainty at the moment, given the current climate, there are different flexible energy contracts available, and you don't necessarily have to sign a long-term contract, which they may be used to doing in the past. And we'll go into a bit more detail there as we go through the webinar.
Yeah, great. So we'll start with going through the adapter options, and Byron, being the engineer amongst us, it's probably best that you kick into that one.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jacob. Yeah, so I guess no matter what business you're in, the way we see it at Flow is there's always opportunity and always ways to improve your energy usage and reduce energy consumption and basically save on energy costs. So what we typically do in talking to customers about this is we recommend, what is a standard energy audit process where we look to kind of get on site and understand the operations and work out what are the opportunities for saving money and what are the investment or business case for making those upgrades. At the moment, though, we understand that that the COVID situation has created some pretty big challenges for Australian businesses, and that's happened in a really short amount of time. So businesses are having to adapt really quickly to this, and some businesses have undergoing significant financially. So what we've been really keen to do with customers, and I guess getting the message out in the industry, is just to help people understand some of those quick wins that are available for adapting their operations during this time. Simple ways they can save money, doesn't need an energy audit or something that's more involved, just things you can do as a business owner to help to manage costs and kind of free up your resources and focus for other more important things during this time. So I think, a key focus area is just ensuring that things are switched off or turned down in response to changes in your business's usual operations. So this, typically applies where there's site operations and occupancy has been reduced as a result of the coronavirus situation. Fewer people, either your restaurant or bar is shut down completely, or you're vastly reduced occupancy. If you're a manufacturer, some people are seeing reduced manufacturing runs and demand. So it's just about, number one, shut down those things that you're not using as often. The biggest wins here are really around refrigeration and air conditioning. So if you're in hospitality and you're operating multiple fridges, or if you're in distribution, consider what you can do to consolidate stock that might be between 3 or 4 fridges into a single fridge or 2 fridges, and turn the other ones off. And while you're doing that, I guess, take the opportunity to check the seals around fridges, check that the fan coils at the back are clean, just those little things that can help with energy efficiency. And I guess if for those people who have more time on their hands during this period, then it's kind of an easy thing to look at. The other things, there's quite a few here, but the other ones here are really switching off lights and equipment that are in areas that aren't being used. So similarly, if you aren't seeing the same levels of occupancy, or there's parts of the operations that are not being used as much, consider turning down your HVAC, turning off zones, turning down fresh air settings for one. If you've got severely or significantly reduced occupancy, there's so many things you can do to kind of turn things down. But the big wins are really in air conditioning, refrigeration, and compressed air if you do have compressed air processes on site.
Yeah, I suppose I'm seeing a bit of that as well with my customers here, Byron. There's a number of hospitality venues that I work with who, weren't really aware of the amount of energy that's being drawn from their fridges alone. And, with reduced stock volumes, working obviously in hospitality, the first bill they received after shutting down during COVID was obviously not as low as they expected. But yeah, by enacting those really small changes, putting, consolidating stock into one fridge, obviously without overcrowding it, of course, was able to reduce that demand significantly, because refrigeration is a very heavy load, particularly for those businesses that are running multiple fridges. And there's some really quick, easy wins that I've started to see reap benefits for customers already.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
HVAC is a really one where you can just by we're in winter at the moment, just turning down the temperature set point, particularly when you don't need to cool as larger area, it can have real step changes in terms of energy use for that equipment.
Okay, sorry, I cut you off there at the start there, Byron. But another one I just thought we could mention is things like your network charges, your demand charges, and your tariff charges. So even if you are reducing your consumption significantly, a lot of the time those charges will remain on your invoice, and they can make up to sometimes 40, 50% of the bill. So it's something to be mindful of. Even if you have shut off consumption, those invoices will continue to roll through. Some distributors have made allowances for it. One in particular has done a lot of work in this space, identifying customers that are facing hardship, and they're actually proactively allowing demand resets to go from agreed demand to actual demand, where the other distributors have kind of been a bit slower in this space, very proactive on the residential front and the small to medium businesses. But for the C&I space, commercial and industrial that we work in, unfortunately, we haven't seen as much from the distributors as we might have liked to. So there haven't been as much they haven't been as proactive, I guess, in focusing on the C&I space. If you're in South Australia, there is some definite options for what you can do there. We are proactively getting in touch with our customers where we can to have conversations about that. And if you yourself are a customer of ours and you think you might be able to benefit, please get in touch with your account manager, and we can look to see what we can do there.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. So this next slide is really talking about adapting your operations through the day to take advantage of lower prices. So, but what I wanted to start with here is just that difference between demand management and demand response, because it is a bit of industry jargon, really, and something we get asked a lot in these kind of forums and from our customers. So essentially, if we're talking about demand management, we're talking about taking advantage of the daily shifts in price, or price shifts throughout the day, to basically make small changes in your operations in order to unlock energy savings. So, in the chart we see here, that involves, you'd be trying to use less energy during those morning and evening peaks, more energy intensive operations happening during the center of the day, the low cost period. Demand response, on the other hand, is a bit different. So this refers to businesses reducing their demand during peak energy periods to essentially help to manage the network. So these are on days when the grid is struggling to cope, either through periods of high demand or disruptions in the grid. And this is an opportunity where businesses can be rewarded for essentially turning down their operations in response to those events and helping our grid to manage that. So Flow Power manages a very large demand response portfolio on behalf of the clients, and it can be very beneficial for the clients who participate in that. But I guess a quick example on what you can do. I know, Emmett, did you have one here that you'd heard of previous?
Yeah. I suppose maybe just as an extension to that point there, the demand management that we're referring to here, as you can see in that peak, really becomes much more accessible to customers that are exposed to the wholesale price and obviously, are able to move things around. Some customers may be sort of used to peak and off-peak pricing, with obviously peak pricing being all day and off-peak being in the evening. So obviously demand management with that relatively blunt peak and off-peak instrument isn't necessarily as easy. You can't always move a daytime process to sometime in the evening, but by having, obviously wholesale linked contracts, which Flow Power offer, that opportunity does present itself relatively quickly. And one example we've sort of had from a customer recently is working in the manufacturing industry. They were pretty much manufacturing 24 hours a day prior to COVID, but are down to only about 30% of their regular output. So what they were essentially doing previously, they were operating 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. all day, which obviously picked up that morning peak and that evening peak, as you can see. But by having a lower output, what they've decided to do is shift that 30% output now into a sort of a tighter band during the daytime. So they're actually operating now from 10 a.m. till 4 p.m., still doing the same output as they were normally, but they're able to avoid that morning peak and that evening peak, which does make up a large proportion of your daily energy spend. I suppose the advantage there is being that wholesale linked, they can have that flexibility in their pricing, which not all customers do have.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, Emmett. I think it's worth pointing out as well, and Byron, you mentioned that when you're doing demand response, not only are you kind of getting a payment potentially through one of the programs like RERT, which is run by AEMO, or just avoiding peak pricing or vol pricing for the year. So obviously what you're doing in that point is you're protecting the grid or reducing your demand when the grid is stressed and keeping the lights on. But also through this demand management, not only are you improving your price outcome by using electricity during a lower cost period, but you're also facilitating more renewables being able to come into the grid by actually using electricity when there's more wind or there's more solar. And at those points, typically prices are cheaper. You're actually allowing for more wind and more solar to come online. So you're actually, the bigger picture there is on top of the savings, you're also facilitating that process or that transfer to a net carbon zero future.
Yeah, that's a really good point to pick up on, Jacob. I think everyone kind of understands the variable nature of renewables, and there's always talk around firming and how you can firm if you decide to go down that path. But I think what's often neglected is the customer's role in providing that firming through responding to what the output's doing and prices in that way. So yeah, really good report, kind of point to pick up on. And certainly the cheapest type of firming we can do is by adapting our operations and managing our own demands through our processes during the day.
Yeah, that's great. I suppose, moving on to the next slide, we wanted to look at the options that businesses have around these low prices at the moment. So I guess for businesses at the moment who maybe have a contract which is due during the COVID-19 scenario, or those that have shut down, I suppose there's a few key things we wanted to touch on. If your electricity contract is due at the moment and you have been shut down or you have reduced load, some businesses may think that it's not really important to look at renewing their contract or to sign a new one. I guess, it's really important that they do make sure that they are looking at options, because some retailers will charge default rates. So having a contract in place is pretty important. Another point to think of here for businesses that don't necessarily have a contract coming out right now, but may have a contract coming out in the next year or two, the low prices we're seeing really aren't just related to the current period. They do extend out for the next couple of years. So it might be an opportunity for those that do have a bit of a longer time horizon to look at contracting in advance to save those prices in the future. I suppose a key thing there as well is that by locking in a price now, you have that price certainty. And lastly, which we'll touch on a bit more in the next slide as well, is that during this low price period, businesses can look for flexible energy contracts. And what do I mean by flexible? I suppose I'm talking about contracts that might be short term for those that don't have much sort of visibility over their operations. I'm talking about contracts which don't have any, minimum consumption requirements, which a lot of fixed contracts do. And also, contracts which have wholesale prices built into them. So businesses do have that flexibility that I was talking about a moment ago with the manufacturer that we've got. I suppose I'll just hand over to Jacob there to talk a little bit more about flexible contracts and what signing a flexible contract can look like for some customers.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Emmett. So I guess particularly at the moment, we have people that there's a fair bit of uncertainty in the market, uncertainty around prices and what they're going to do, uncertainty about what businesses look like over the next 6 months, but also longer term as well. So lots of people aren't looking to maybe sign into a long-term contract at the moment. As Emmett said, if you can do that, it's a great time to do it because prices are at, I believe, 4-year lows, and that's extending out until the end of 2022. So if you can look at that, definitely worth looking at locking in a longer-term contract. But if that's there's a bit more uncertainty at the moment, and as Emmett said, lots of those contracts do have what's called a load flex. So if you're looking at a 3-year contract, there'll be a plus or minus 10% load flex in there. So if you only use 70% of the load next year, you may very well get charged up to that full 90, depending on what's in that specific contract. What we've got available, if you do want something shorter term, is a 3-month rolling contract. So basically what that is, it's a spot market contract that just runs on a 3-month basis. We just need 3 months notice to let us know that you're changing, and then we can facilitate that. So that could be an option for you if you aren't looking at a 1, 2, or 3-year contract. The other point we've got there is, these are more comments from customers. So prices are still falling, don't need to sign now. So I guess that is one we get a lot, particularly as the market's been on a downward trend for what looks to be around 12 to 18 months now. People get the idea that prices are still coming down and they're just going to wait to see what happens. The fact is they can rebound very quickly as well. We've seen 20 to 30% drops in the last couple of months, and we could just as well see a 20 to 30% rise if things start going back to normal or something else happens in the energy market to push them up. FlowPower also have what we call an active option. Basically what this is it's a small premium you'd pay on the future years of your contract. And now if the market continues to come down, you can actually relock your price at the lower rate. If the market goes up, you've got a ceiling there. So if you lock in rates now at say 5 cents for 2021, and they do continue to fall down to say 3 cents, you can actually recontract at that lower rate, which isn't a standard offering across other retailers. Final one we've got there is I can't change my operations. So this is something we talked about before, whereas moving your consumption under lower price periods can result in a benefit for yourself. That's the comment I guess we get from most customers that come to us, but it's just those little things that add up. So things like delaying, we've got customers that delay the start times of charging their forklifts by putting a timer on them. So when everyone knocks off at 5 p.m, they plug their forklift in, but it doesn't actually start charging till 8 p.m. Little things like that can actually add up to like a big savings just by removing those, what they call super peaks in the afternoons and in the mornings. So just to, I guess, summarize before Emmett was actually going to take us through a case study, just so those 3 options for your business. So adapting your operations, looking at when the best time to use energy is if you've had a fall in consumption and you're only running 1 shift where you used to run 3. Little changes can result in big savings. If you are a FlowPower customer, definitely look at doing everything you can to move your electricity consumption out of those afternoon and morning peaks and move it under the solar curves or to later at night. Take advantage of the low energy prices that are available at the moment. So as we said, prices are really low. I wouldn't sit back and wait for too long if you can sign a 2 or 3 year contract. Definitely there's value out there at the moment. And prioritize flexibility if there's uncertainty in your business. If you're not sure what's going to happen over the next 6 months and maybe load's going to be 50% low, just be careful if you are looking at signing a 2 or 3 year contract. There may be some clause in your contract that comes back to haunt you there. So just look at other options, shorter term contract, 3-month rolling contracts, as we kind of discussed before. And that's in summary. And I think, Emma, you want to kick into that case study now?
Yeah, that's correct. I suppose that the case study itself really looks at the advantages of a flexible energy contract. So we delve into a little bit of what the active option can mean for a customer, and essentially the advantage that it's actually happened for a real life customer. So this is a case study for a customer that I worked with since last year. They'd come to us sort of seeing relatively low energy prices. As you mentioned earlier, Jacob, prices have been trending down for the better part of that 18 months sort of time frame. They came to us and saw low prices coming out of a fixed rate contract. What this customer opted for was actually a 2-year agreement. So they locked in their first year price, but they also locked in their second year price with the active option. So I guess what happened during the contract term is over the first year, they had that price certainty. And as the first year started to evolve, prices in the second year actually started or continued to fall, I should say. So we got towards the beginning of calendar year 20. And given that the market had fallen by some 20 to 30% since the customer signed, they were able to execute the option and actually save, I believe it was around 15% on their energy price for that second year, which we all know, I mean, energy prices, they're a big cost for businesses, and 15% to be shaved off the invoice does mean a lot. I guess another advantage of the Power Active option, which we've alluded to here, is that the customer was able to make some small changes to the way they actually perform their on-site operations. As you mentioned earlier, it was very small stuff around time of use. And by making those small changes, you're able to also influence your price in a positive way. And I believe after those 2 changes were implemented, the 15% energy cost came down, as well as an additional 5% was removed off the energy rate by just making those small changes. Yeah, I suppose it sort of proved the option as being a valuable inclusion in the contract, and this customer actually opted for the 3rd year with the active option as well.
And I was just going to say, what I really love about this case study, and maybe if we can just go back to the previous slide, is just that journey and the timeline for the customer as they progress through, I guess, coming on board as a Flow Power customer. It's a really common journey, I guess, we see, and just around, they come on board and I guess they might not have experience or have thought about doing those small changes or demand management to their operations in the past. But once they come on board, they get familiar with the Flow model, as you can kind of see in the timeline here, and begin to get those price signals. Customers, always, you start to, or really commonly start to see customers taking advantage of those price signals over time and saying, hey, look, yeah, maybe we should do this kind of manufacturing in the morning, in the daytimes rather than the mornings, or whatever, and making those small tweaks to their operation to kind of improve. And I guess, Jacob, you probably know better than most, but there's been some customers which are with Flow Power for a long time now, and are just incredibly sophisticated about how they work through the model and the savings that they can get from that in how they manage operations.
Yeah, that's right. It's really promising to see as well. Like, as you kind of alluded to, this process we see here is very typical. People come to us, for whatever reason. Maybe they like the option, maybe they've had some flexibility in their load, but as they've kind of stayed with us, and typically they do, we have one of the better retention rates across the market, with around over 90% of our customers renewing year on year, and we see customers just continue to increase their sophistication to the point where they're coming up with ideas that we hadn't thought of, and that's really promising to see, because we are very proactive. Engineers and the account managers definitely work with the customers on site, but they always know their operations the best, and often we hear a little gem on little things they've thought of doing, like that forklift example I mentioned before. Some of the more typical ones for that on-site load management is things like letting the temperature in your refrigeration creep up over a couple of hours during that high price period. So doing a bit of pre-cooling, letting it drift up while prices are high, and then cooling down again. So lots of little things, and we definitely see customers get a lot smarter about it, put a lot more focus into it, particularly after they kind of see the value of what they're able to save. And that's that demand management, demand response piece. So obviously demand response, doing a lot of manual shutdowns or automatic shutdowns to respond to really high prices or those word events, and then demand management doing daily operations. So yeah, it's great to see, I guess, and we've worked with a number of customers to take them from not knowing what demand response means to, you know, coming up with new ideas for us on their demand response processes.
What I particularly love seeing in some of those kind of high price days you spoke about, which were in you know, summer 2019, was those customers that actually had PPAs from large scale renewable generators operating in the background. And when those price events came, you know, over those couple of days, they actually turned down their operations, not just to save money in energy costs, but also to make money from their offtakes that were operating during that time. And that's kind of like just a really fantastic story about how businesses can make those changes and actually, you know, offset a huge chunk of their energy costs.
Yeah, it can be massive, and like that is kind of the perfect customer, isn't it? Someone that's got one of the on-site PPAs, so that's a contract with a wind farm or a solar farm that we pass through to customers under our virtual generation agreements. So what happens when the price goes high, they're actually selling the energy generated from a wind farm or a solar farm back into the market and not using energy themselves. So they end up putting themselves to a net earner rather than I guess spending money. And we've seen some of our customers that are really good at demand response and have those renewable PPAs end up with rates that were around 60 to 70% below the market during those Q1s where we have a bit more volatility in the market.
Great.
Cool.
So I suppose
All right.
we'll move on to some questions here. If anyone had any questions, please pop them into the chat so we can answer as we go through.
There was one earlier in the piece which I tried to answer around distributors, and they followed up asking who the proactive one was. So I guess that's public knowledge. So SAPN have been very proactive with it. They've actually, we did go out to all customers, all distributors, sorry, and they were quick to tell us that they were already working on it. And then within the next week or two, they'd come back to us with some options to limit or reset demand for customers. The other distributors have all been proactive in the sense that they're looking after residential and also the small to medium market, but we're yet to kind of hear a lot on the large market, and hopefully we do over the coming weeks.
Okay. Thanks, Jacob. I've got another question here around, here we go, around being in a contract. Someone is in a contract to the end of the year. We can understand what their options are now for managing that.
Yeah, sure. It's a really good question. I suppose it sort of harks back to some customers who may not be coming out of contract for this year or even next year. So this person is coming out at the end of this year. They definitely can actually look at contracting in advance. So the low prices we're seeing in the market aren't, as I said earlier, aren't really just, you know, day-to-day prices we're seeing. It's actually the futures market has come off quite steadily. And we are seeing, as Jacob alluded to earlier, those sort of 4-year lows for calendar year 21, 22, and even as far out as 23. So for this particular person, options for them would be to maybe look at renewing their contract either for 1, 2, or 3 years. They could potentially do that by signing a fixed contract in advance, or they could even do something that Flow Power offers, which is by taking the option on those prices. So they can get that certainty over their price now, but in the event that we do see that market keep declining over the year, they can take advantage of an even lower price, as we alluded to in that case study. I've got another one come through here as well. It's in relation to saving tips. So their business is, hang on one second, my business is shut down. What's the best energy saving tip that I can implement? Maybe Byron, can I hand that one over to you?
Yeah, sure, no problem, Emmett. I mean, for something like this, we'd love to, you know, talk to our customers about what's the nature of their operations, how it's shut down, and I guess talk them through some of the things we can do specifically. But at a high level, you know, I can really suggest looking at things like the HVAC, temp control. That's really the one, and turning off equipment. So that's the one we always find. I think businesses are shut down. The owners close close the premises, but meanwhile the HVAC's sitting there on a kind of internal control system, which will just continue to turn on every morning. And similarly with any equipment that's been left running. So I think getting in there during the day, just to experience, even though you might be shut down, get in there during the day, experience how the energy is being used as you see it, look around, and then do what you can do to kind of turn those things off or turn them down.
Yeah, that's really good. I think another one popped through here, which probably was in response to my explanation around the option there. It's so how does the active option actually work? Jacob, can I hand that one over to you, mate?
Sure can. So basically our option, it's something that actually exists in the market. So retailers can take advantage of this, and the market is known as a swaption. So basically what would happen is you'd pay a small premium to lock a price for a future contract, but you don't have the obligation to take that contract. So you have the right, but not the obligation. So we've tried to simplify it a bit for our customers, and we call it the active option. Basically, it's a variable premium, but it's usually around 0.2 to 0.3 cents per kilowatt hour. To give that reference, you know, last year that was made up around 2 to 3% of maybe your energy price. But what happens if the price of the market on the ASX continues to fall between when you sign up to that contract and the start of the period? What we can do is we can not take that contract, so we don't actually take the original rate, and we refix it at the current market rate. So just to give you a live example, your prices were 10 cents per kilowatt hour in June last year. You'd pay around 10.2, 10.3 cents per kilowatt hour, so around 2 or 3% higher. But then as we approach the date, the market price is 5 cents per kilowatt hour. So what would happen is you wouldn't take the original contract at 10, we'd lock it at 5, and that would be the rate you would pay. So this is something, it's not something you actively have to monitor. We can do it all on your behalf. And as Emmett, I think, mentioned earlier, we have actually executed this for a large portion of our customers that took the option last year. And they're looking at savings of up to around 20% and probably as low as 10. So that 2 or 3% typically is insignificant when we actually see what happens. And it's something worth noting as well, sorry, that there are periods where prices typically are higher. So, you know, June, November, December, often people are contracting in that period. There's a high demand for electricity contracts and prices tend to be higher. So taking an option at that point for the later years, so if you were to do it this year in 2020, taking an option on 22 and 23, if you actually back test this, you often will see an average savings of around 10 to 20% by just taking the option.
Yeah, great. Do we have any other questions that have come through?
There was one I saw which I liked. It was the prices are the same for the next contract for this customer for the next contract starting on the 1st July. Is that any good? I don't know, because I don't know what the rate is, but I'm assuming probably not. As we kind of said, rates are at 4-year lows. So if it was a contract signed in the last 1, 2 or 3 years and they're offering you the same rates for the 1st of July, I'd definitely be asking some questions, or feel free to give us a call if you'd like, because we're definitely pricing at the moment the best we have for the last 3 or 4 years. So definitely worth exploring your options if you're getting the same pricing as you've been on for the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's about looking at other alternatives. I mean, the current market presents a lot of opportunities, right? And if you are getting those, prices that are exactly the same, you'd be wanting to look elsewhere, in my opinion. We've had one just pop through and probably got time for one last question, I think, before we wrap up. It was, my business is closed, but I got an energy bill. Why is that? I suppose it'd be difficult to answer that question without seeing the invoice itself, but chances are that it's probably still mostly coming from network charges. So we obviously said earlier in the webinar that about 40% of most C&I invoices are made up of network charges, mostly demand charges. So for this particular customer, if they've seen a big reduction in their energy usage on site, it might be an opportunity to approach the distributor through your retailer and ask for maybe a reset of that demand charge, because I'd be expecting that network charge or the demand charge component is making up a large proportion of that invoice.
Great, thanks, Evan. I think that about brings us to 45 minutes. So we'll sign off for now. Thank you, Emmett. Thank you, Byron, and thanks for everyone for joining us. Next steps, if you've got any questions, please give us a call to our inbound line. There's also a form fill on our website if you want us to get in touch. Yeah, so thank you everyone, and we'll sign off.
Thanks, guys. Probably just good to note as well before we leave that everyone will get a recording of the webinar after this as well, so you guys can listen back to it if needs be. And as well, if you're interested, tomorrow at 2 p.m, our weekly webinar on the spot is occurring. If you're interested in tuning in again, that'd be great. So I hope to see you there.
Cool.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.